I think we are live. Okay, hello, welcome. This is Credit Versio's Q&A Wednesday live for August 2nd. I'm your host, Dave Michalek. With me is John Ulzheimer. Again, it's been a while. Welcome
Yes, hello.
back.
I did not serve a 30-day sentence anywhere. We just could not make our dates work last month.
Yeah, and I apologize to everybody. We were supposed to go live last Wednesday, and then that was the flood. And then the Wednesday before that, I was out of town. So we are back. We had a bunch of people post, like, when are you guys going to go live again? Well, here we are. Okay. So for those jumping on, we'll give you a second. Jenny, hello, welcome. Good to see you. I don't recognize your name, so maybe you're new, or are you new to Credit Versio, or you just found this on Facebook, decided, and these two guys are good looking. I just got to hang out and see what these guys have to say.
Right.
Although John, for being maybe a year older than me, remarkably has much more hair than I do. I don't know how that works. I didn't get the genetic the genetic gifts, I guess.
You got the facial hair genetics. I got the hair on top of the head genetics.
Yeah, I know. I would swap that though. I would swap it. All right, new here, been a user for a while. Okay, great, good to have you, John. You sent me a great. I actually read this article when it came out back in October, I believe, but I didn't realize it was going to be content for your latest seminar that you guys did up in Chicago, was it?
Yeah, we did. Matt Listro did the Credit Con Platinum event,
Yeah.
and it was in Chicago. Really good. It's one of those cool events that's small, so it's not like you don't have to worry about what 300 people are doing. It's much more
Yeah.
organized, smaller, and controllable. And uh, yeah, and so you can actually have a more fruitful discussions because everything is kind of conversation based rather than presentation based.
Yeah, it reminds me of the old cohorts that you and Chad used to do back in the day.
Yeah,
I think I went
that's
to
right.
two or three of those.
That's kind of how Matt modeled
Yeah,
these platinum events.
yeah, that's great. I keep telling myself to go to one. I don't know how applicable it is, but it'd be good to see everybody there. Okay, all right, we got a handful of people jumping on. So, like always, this is a live Q&A. If you've got questions about credit scores, credit reports, the bureaus, that's what we're here for. We always pass on, or not pass, but I typically don't put straight up credit repair questions on the screen because we don't usually cover that subject with John here. But if you do have questions related to that, I will swing back around and answer them for you. But John, you and I talked or exchanged emails earlier about a very interesting subject, and I'm glad you sent this article to me because it's been a long time since I've read it about the it's going into the whole COVID thing and the scrutiny that the bureaus have come under by the CFPB. But there's a couple things I wanted to bring up in here. Was there something that you wanted to touch on that
Yeah,
inspired this?
yeah. I think it's hard to put your finger on an exact number of disputes that the credit reporting agencies receive on an annual basis. Um, Back in 2011, the CFPB published they published a paper, and it had a bunch of green. The CFPB's color branding is green, and so I call it the green paper because it has their
Yeah.
green branding on it. Um, and that particular paper that they published indicated or suggested that the credit bureaus collectively get about 8 million disputes a year. The the article that I sent you, which included data that was um, similar, meaning it was quantifying the volume of disputes, suggested that one of the credit bureaus alone got 14 million last year, or last year or the year before. Nonetheless, what it suggests is a couple of things. Number one, it possibly could suggest that the data that the CFPB published a long time ago was wrong, which is a possibility.
Yeah.
It could also suggest that the number of disputes that the credit bureaus receive have gone up, 400 to 500% over the past decade or so. And nonetheless, where we are today is it looks like the volume of disputes that are received is considerably higher than what was put on the record by the CFPB a decade ago.
Yeah. Yeah, the part that really stood out to me, and I'll swing back around and explain why I think this is relevant, especially to something that you and I have been talking about, and we've talked about on this live for a long time. And let me just read this. It says the subcommittee uncovered evidence showing that the three credit bureaus discard millions of disputes a year without investigation, finding at least 13.8 million were thrown out between 2019 and 2021. It goes on to say discarding disputes violates current fair credit laws, including the Fair Credit Reporting Act, among others. In the CRA's defense, and this is the part that becomes interesting, is that the disputes are discarded without investigation when they are suspected of being sent by a credit repair service.
Right.
And then in the paragraph below, one of the things that they outline is some indicators that that make them think that these are not genuine disputes, that these are coming from a dispute mill, like we've talked about before.
Yeah.
And then we swing back and we talk about this part, and I hope I've got it in here. I really hope that I've got it. It's in one of the assets. Oh, here we go. I'm really hoping I've got a picture of and maybe I don't.
And while you're doing that, the credit reporting agencies are well within their rights under the Fair Credit Reporting Act to ignore disputes if they have a reason to believe they are frivolous or irrelevant. So that quote in that article is a little bit inflammatory because it suggests that there's some person standing there with bins and bins of mail just kind of dumping them in a dumpster.
Right.
It's not really what's happening. If the credit reporting agencies believe that they're not valid, and unfortunately, this is not uncommon in the credit repair world, where there's what I call indicia of frivolousness, meaning that these letters they smell so bad that it almost takes an idiot to not realize that they came from a credit repair mill or a jamming shop. And so they're absolutely well within their rights under FICRA to ignore those. So for the folks who are watching, don't take what David quoted from that article to mean that the credit bureaus aren't allowed to ever ignore a dispute by a consumer. They absolutely are allowed to do so under certain conditions.
Can you see this on the screen, John?
Yeah.
Okay, this is what I was hunting around for, and I'm glad you said that, because that was the point that I was going to make bringing this up. This is right out of the Fair Credit Reporting Act, and it essentially says, after they describe everything that they have to do upon receiving a dispute, at the very end of it, it's almost like, and I'm paraphrasing with this exclusion, this section G is like, oh, by the way, this paragraph referring to what was gone over in extreme detail shall not apply to the notice of dispute. This is your dispute letter submitted by, is prepared on behalf of the consumer by, or submitted on a form supplied to a consumer by a credit repair organization. Then they go as defined in 4033, and that's the definition of a credit repair company. So what are we getting to with all this? Well, John, we just talked about the credit cohort a second ago. I remember my very first one that I went to, I think it was in 2017, maybe 18.
Was either Cleveland or Atlanta?
It was in Cleveland. I believe it was in Cleveland. Regardless, I remember when
very
we were
important
up. Why is that? I was going to say, hold on. So there was one really cool little factoid that you shared with us having worked in dispute resolution at Equifax. And, back then being much less informed than I am now, that's part of the whole credit repair shtick is like, how do you fool the bureaus? And even outline it in this article, like they look for inconsistent fonts and inks and, things like that, that credit repair people think is going to fool the bureau. And I remember you said something so epic that, to this day, it still sticks with me, which is, listen, you know how you guys bundle up your dispute letters and you send them out in a big bin? Because most big, at least there, that cohort, all of us there were pretty big sized credit repair companies. So we weren't doing 20 clients a month. We had hundreds or thousands. And you said, when you send those dispute letters out in that big bin, he's like, that, you said, that's the way they come into the bureau. And he goes, we just put them off in the side there. We know you're not fooling anybody. We know it's coming from you.
Right. And they all come from the same postal mark. So you have a consumer that lives in Las Vegas, and the dispute letter, the dispute letters that they send has a postal code from New York, which obviously only makes sense if the consumer is on vacation or is working in New York while they wrote their dispute letter. So
yeah.
And so the way that the credit repair industry tried to get around that, once they became aware that that was identifying their letters as being, coming from a credit repair or sourced from a credit repair organization, was drop shipping. And so for those of you who are not familiar with drop shipping in the credit repair letter context, so if I have a credit repair letter, this is not a credit repair letter, but let's just say this was a credit repair letter, and I live in Atlanta, but I use a credit repair company in, I don't know, Knoxville.
Salt Lake.
So you're wherever. I mean, so I need to get a Knoxville postmark on the letter, or it's going to be pretty obvious that John, who lives in Atlanta, is mailing dispute letters with a Knoxville postal code. It's not going to take a rocket scientist to figure out that there's something. There has to be an explanation for that. So what would happen is the credit repair companies, depending on where the consumer or where their customer lived, would actually ship this letter to like a local FedEx or Kinko's or UPS store in the city where I lived, and you could actually pay them to mail the letter. Yeah. So essentially, you were paying them to do nothing more than drop it in their local post office or send it from their own store, and it would get because of that, it would get a local postal code, a postmark, and that would eliminate any sort of inconsistency between where the consumer actually lived and the postmark on the letter.
Yeah, right.
And I actually took a tour. I'm not going to identify the name of the credit repair company, but they're a big shop. I took a tour of their mail center. They had baskets basically lined up against a wall, all different cities of where their customers lived. And so if we had letters that needed to be mailed from, Des Moines, they would be in the Des Moines basket. If we had letters or Iowa basket, if they had letters that needed to be mailed from Nebraska, they were in the Nebraska basket. And once the basket got full enough, they would, ship them off to the local FedEx, Kinko's, or UPS for drop shipping to get the local postal code.
Yeah. I know that there's a couple. I know who you're talking about. Those are big shops that tend to do that. Yeah, that's no small fee. Jamie Lee Ann, that's more of a credit repair question, but I wanted to let you know, if you're still watching, that I did see you post that question on one of the recorded lives on our Facebook page, and I did answer that for you. So hopefully you can swing back around and look at that answer. And Jenny, great job, round 4. Yeah, congratulations. Any success is good success. So we have a little, sizable group, a little over a dozen people watching. Feel free to jump in and ask questions. We're talking about dispute letters. Oh, and speaking of which, Sean, I had a question for you, because one of the things that they're talking about in the letter that the bureaus say that they use as one of the guidelines, whether or not they're going to determine that it's a credit repair letter, is consistent language. And they don't use templates, but they say language that is consistent throughout a dispute, meaning I take that to mean that they've seen this kind of a dispute letter over and over again. My question is, because it does happen with Credit Versio customers on occasion, where even though the letter is printed, made by them, mailed out by them, stamped, live stamp, every now and then they do get the rare, like, hey, we don't think this was prepared by you response. But I also am wondering if they're responding that way to anything that's template driven, not that Credit Versio is template driven, but if they're using that kind of an outline, I know, and maybe you have a different opinion of this, but this is what I've heard, that a lot of the disputes that people send are template based, and you can get them right off of the FTC website and the CFPB. So wouldn't that be a crazy thing for the bureaus to refuse a template letter when it's coming from the regulatory agencies that oversee them? Do you, any opinion on that at all? Is that a little bit of a dangerous game with them?
No. I think what they're referring to, not necessarily templates, but what I call like the synonym generator programs, where you have one paragraph where everything is just worded like it doesn't even make sense. And then you have a next paragraph that is incredibly cogent and quotes sections of the law. But the first paragraph, the person can't even conjugate a verb properly. And so that's I think that may be where they're headed with that. But I can tell you that this battle between the credit reporting agencies and credit repair companies has been raging for over 3 decades. I mean, it was raging when I got into the industry, and I got into the industry. November will be my 32nd year, and it was raging before I started working in the industry. And so this is a long-standing rivalry between the two entities, the bureaus and then the credit repair folks.
Yeah.
And so. And I'm not saying that it's the same players on each side, right? I mean, we have a credit bureau that no longer exists, a credit bureau that didn't exist at the time, and credit repair companies that didn't exist that now do exist, and a federal law that didn't exist regarding credit repair companies that now does exist regarding credit. So the industry and the landscape has changed considerably, but there, you still have some shops that try these crazy letter styles and believe that there's some magic formula that credit bureaus are either A, that they've never seen before, or B, are dumb and can't tell the difference between a valid dispute versus one that clearly is coming from someone who's just trying to get paying to have these letters kind of repetitively sent to them.
Yeah, well, and it's one of the reasons why I tell everybody, we get questions all the time. It's like, how come these letters don't quote the law? It's like, why would you do that? There's 2 reasons. One,
their obligation. I'm quite certain the credit
right. That's the 2 reasons I give. Is number one, the bureaus know what they need to do. Everything that they do, as far as the dispute handling process, is regulated by federal law, so they know what it is. They don't need you to tell them what it is. And number 2 is you're going to come across looking like you didn't make this letter yourself, because are you studying law on the weekends and suddenly you're an amateur attorney? Don't do that. That's not going to help you. All right, Jenny, with go ahead.
I was going to say, and the people that are reading these letters are not lawyers, right? The dispute letters are not received and handled by these millions and millions of letters that the credit bureaus are receiving. There's not an army of lawyers who are sitting there opening mail and reading those. So it doesn't matter what statute you quote, or what section, or what decision in some jurisdiction. It doesn't matter, because the person who's reading that, it's meaningless to them. What they want to know is who you are, what is your identification information, so they can pull up your credit report in their admin system, and what is it that you're challenging, and what about it are you challenging? I'm John Ulzheimer. I live at 123 Main Street. There's a collection on my credit report. The balance is 0. That's really what they're looking for. They could care less what statute you're quoting. They understand the reason that they're looking at that letter is because they understand that they have an obligation.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. That's how we got there to begin with.
Yeah. If they didn't believe that they had an obligation to perform an investigation, no one would be reading the letter.
Right. Exactly. Jenny, you have a question about bankruptcy. If it falls off, for example, a 650 score with a Chapter 7 weighted differently than a 650 without a Chapter 7.
Yeah, really good question. And so what you're asking about in the credit scoring world is referred to as odds alignment. And I'm not going to bore you about what odds alignment is and means, but what odds alignment means with respect to your question is as long as it's from the same credit report and it's the same credit scoring model, and that model is a FICO model. I don't know if VantageScore does odds alignment, but I know FICO does. In that case, if we're truly talking an apples to apples comparison, then a 650 is a 650 is a 650, meaning that if a lender is using if they're using credit scores in their decision making process, then they will look at you as a 650 regardless of whether you have a bankruptcy or not, and the credit score indicates the same level of risk. Now, having said that, obviously lenders make decisions based on things in addition to credit scores. And so some lender may have a policy that if you have a Chapter 7 on your credit report in the last X years, then you're not going to get approved, or you may not get a pre-approval in the mail, since I know you're asking about pre-approvals. Yeah. Number two, and this is a good one for you to know, and I'm not pointing at anybody in particular, but if you filed Chapter 7 bankruptcy, that means you discharged debts that you used to rightfully owe to lenders. Lenders have pretty good memories. And so you may find yourself in a situation that it doesn't matter what your credit score is. If you have discharged a debt with a certain card issuer, they may never do business with you again, regardless of what your credit score is or what your credit report looks like. But yeah, to your point, the odds associated, or the expectation probability of default, the likelihood of you paying late for two 650s, as long as they're coming from FICO's models and they're coming from the same credit report, then yes, they mean the same thing.
Great question, Jenny. Mm-hmm. Mandy, is it possible to see a jump? So this isn't really a credit repair question, John. This is just what's going on with the report. Is it possible to see a jump in scores before Credit Versio does another check in 40 days? I sent my letters on Monday. My score for Equifax already jumped 107 points today. So there's a lot of possible explanations for that one.
So I don't know enough about Credit Versio to know what the relevance of the 40 days is.
That's just when Credit Versio brings in a new credit report, John, every 40 days. It's 10 days to put everything together, drop it in the mail, and then 30 days for the Bureau to do their investigation. So that's why it's on a 40-day update.
Yeah. So credit scores don't follow any sort of calendar pattern, meaning that, first off, a credit score is a transactional event, meaning that you don't have a credit report and a credit score that's sitting on top of that report always, and the score is just constantly going up and down over time as your credit report information changes. A lot of people believe that. A lot of people think that your credit score is like the reading of a thermometer, which it stays the same for a while, then it goes up a little bit, it goes down a little bit, might go down a lot, might go up a lot, might stay same for a period of. That's not how credit scores work. Credit scores are only calculated when some transaction occurs, like you apply for credit, or some lender does account management run, or you're pulling your credit report and a score from some website. Then your score is calculated at that point in time. That's why they call it a snapshot. It's calculated at that point in time. And so it doesn't really follow any sort of calendar, meaning that your score doesn't change once every 40 days to coincide with the Credit Versio data feed update. So your score could actually be different in the morning than it is in the afternoon. So if your credit report looked like this in the morning and your score was calculated, but then it looked like that in the afternoon and your score was calculated, it's different, right? There's 5 fingers here and there's 4 fingers here. So your credit reports are different, and it's highly likely that your credit score could be different even within the same day, because your credit report changed and for some reason your score was calculated to coincide with the differences in the report. So certainly you can pull your credit score today and it could be 700. You can pull it tomorrow and it could be a 710. You can pull it the day after and it could be a 720. It just depends on what is different on those reports and when are you actually asking that those scores be calculated.
Yeah, and also too, was it Mandy? Yeah, also too many, and I hear this a lot. I've heard this countless times over the years. Is somebody will look at their credit score from that's being presented on Credit Versio, and it depends on where you're getting your score from. You know, Identity IQ or an Array product or Smart Credit or wherever, and then they go over to another source of scores. Maybe you're looking at a Vantage score through Credit Versio, and you go and you look at a FICO score. Now, obviously, something had changed. That's the only way you would account for a 107-point difference. But it also could be that maybe you're looking at a Vantage score versus a FICO score. That's possible as well. So when you're comparing scores and you want to see what's going on, the easiest thing to do or the smartest thing to do is to do apples and apples. Make sure you're getting the same score from the same source. Otherwise you're going to see several different. You can see several different variations of your scores.
Yeah, that's been one of the, that was a problem. I don't want to call it a problem. That's been a topic or an issue for as long as credit scoring has existed. Because the minute, the first FICO developed credit bureau based risk scoring system, right? The actual true formal term for a credit score was released in 1989, right? Probably before a lot of the people who are watching us right now were even born. But
Awesome.
that was when the first FICO credit bureau score was installed, and it was installed at Equifax. It was called Beacon. So if you ever see BEACON, all caps, if you ever see Beacon written somewhere, that is what the FICO score distributed by Equifax used to be called. That was the branding of the score. Quickly thereafter, like within 2 years, there was a FICO score at TransUnion and there was a FICO score at TRW, because remember, this predates Experian. So even back then, you had 3 different credit reports that mattered and 3 different FICO scores. So you could have a TRW credit report that had a score of 700, a TransUnion credit report that had a 715, and an Equifax credit report that had a 650. Back then, it was you did see more prevalent differences across all 3 bureaus because, back in the 80s, in the last century, the issue of data consistency was very, very different than it is today. There are absolutely regional differences in credit bureau information. Equifax was the powerhouse in the Southeast. TRW was the powerhouse on the West Coast, and TransUnion had a lot of the Upper East and a little bit of the middle of the country. And there was actually a company called CSC Credit Services that used to own a tremendous percentage of the credit reports in the Equifax system from different states in the Midwest. And so back then, you may have had lenders that really only reported information to one of the credit bureaus because of just this predates the internet also. So they didn't have customers that lived all over the country. They only had customers that lived in the little local geographies where they actually had brick and mortar. So this issue of score inconsistency was, this is a long time thing. It used to be considerably more prevalent. Today, it's almost like one component of that has improved while another component of it has gotten worse. Number one is your credit reports should be much more consistent looking today than they did 30 some odd years ago, because most lenders are online and most lenders will do business in almost every state, save some credit unions or whatnot. And so therefore, most furnishers are going to send their information to all 3 credit bureaus. So yes, I know there's still going to be some differences here and there, but if you laid your credit reports side by side, they should be pretty darn consistent with respect to the data. So that has certainly improved. Where it's gotten more complicated on the credit scoring side is you have 4 or 5 dozen FICO scores that are in commercial circulation today, and 2 Vantage score credit scores. So you literally have dozens and dozens and dozens of credit bureau scores that are in commercial circulation today. Almost all of them have the same brand, FICO, and 2 of them have the same brand, VantageScore. So the challenge for apples to apples comparisons is it's more of a challenge today, not because of the credit bureau side of the equation, but because of the credit score side of the equation, because you just have so many more scores. And no, they're not all going to be the same. They should be similar, but it's highly unlikely that you're ever going to run into a scenario where you have the same 3-digit number across all 3 bureaus at any given time. They are likely going to be different.
Yeah. I've looked at probably 15, maybe 20,000 credit reports in the last decade, John. I think I've seen scores the same across all 3 bureaus maybe 3 or 4 times in my entire career. Okay, so Jamie, I see you've got a pretty big, actually 2 big questions. I didn't even read it. Let me just put it up there. That's a lot to digest. Okay, let's see here. A little deeper. I had 5 credit cards that all hit the same hardship. They all closed at once. 1 credit card reported to the next. I'm not sure what you mean by that. I never even knew that was a thing. Let me bring that up one more time. Okay, so next thing I know, they closed all of them and sold them, which I paid all the collections in full 2 months later. It took me from 8-year age history with perfect payment to a year history age because I no longer have credit cards, which also took a huge toll. How would you, I guess, go about fixing that?
It might be a little complex for something like, because no one other than Jamie is going to get any value out of us digging into that thing.
Yeah, Jamie, let's see if you can chop maybe that down into something that's a little bit more digestible. The one thing, though, I'm not sure what you mean by they all closed at once. 1 credit card reported to the next. They don't do that. Credit cards don't all report together. They're completely independent. So see if you can just kind of parse that down a little bit for us, Jamie. I'm sorry to make you do that. I know you put a lot of thought into that, but just something that we can put up on the screen here and maybe, answer in little chunks while, in the maybe 10 minutes or so, 15 minutes or so that we have left. Gregory, you're very welcome. Glad you are enjoying it. Andy, you're welcome. Let's see. Emmanuel Curtis, also another big question here. Yeah, this is frustrating.
I actually read it. It's a good one.
Okay.
It's have a public score factor. Yeah.
The presence of derogatory public information such as bankruptcy. I do not have any of this on my credit report, and they continue to say this. One more time. Why I don't see any reference to bankruptcy on any of my 3 credit reports. Okay.
And then there's another follow-up, and he mentions LexisNexis. And so there we go. So, all right. So a couple things. So LexisNexis is, well, there are a couple things. Number one, they're a consumer reporting agency because they maintain a file on you. If you've ever pulled your LexisNexis report, mine is like 400 pages long. And I've heard that that's not uncommon, that people have these colossal reports from. So LexisNexis is a consumer reporting agency. They're also a public records vendor. So back when judgments and tax liens were on credit reports, the credit bureaus would get them from LexisNexis. Obviously, those are not on credit reports from the big 3 any longer. But LexisNexis is also the bankruptcy vendor. So LexisNexis, you're not going to pull a credit report from any of the big 3 credit bureaus and see LexisNexis as a furnisher like you'd see Chase or Wells Fargo or Citibank or Discover or whatnot. So you're not going to see that. But if you have a bankruptcy on your credit report, then it's highly likely that bankruptcy was sourced by the credit reporting agencies through LexisNexis. So that's where LexisNexis kind of interplays or overlaps with the big 3 credit reporting agencies. To your prior question, I don't know, David, if you want to throw that back up there.
Yeah.
What you're referring to, I believe what you're referring to is are score factors. And so public record and or collection, there's actually a FICO score factor that you've almost quoted verbatim, which is presence of collection and or public record and or collection. So I think you're referring to a FICO score factor. The those score factors they're programmed, meaning that there's no person looking at your credit reports and saying, "Oh, bankruptcy, let's put this score factor," or looking at your credit report and saying, "Oh, there's a collection, let's put that score factor on the report." Those are all looking for certain codes, and the presence of those codes will trigger that language to appear along with your score. So let me give you some other ideas that could be possibilities as to why that particular score factor is popping up and you're having a hard time seeing it, visually seeing it. Number one, you may be looking at a credit report that's incomplete and isn't showing you everything that the big three actually are housing. That's number one. And that's not uncommon. So you may think, that doesn't make any sense. It's actually more common than you might think. Number two is, from a bankruptcy perspective, you may be looking for either the filing, which is in a completely different section than debts that are discharged in the bankruptcy. So they're maintained in two separate sections of a report, and they're coded differently. So you may have no actual record of a filing on a credit report, but you may have a debt that has a bankruptcy code associated with it, indicating that it's discharged. And the scoring model can see that, and that would also trigger that reference to a public record. There's no other, if we would have this conversation before 2018, then I would have had to also talk about tax liens and judgments as being a possibility, but those aren't on reports anymore. So whenever you see a score factor that references derogatory public records, they're referring to bankruptcies, because that's the only public record that is on a credit report any longer. So that's the public record side of that. Now we have to address the collection side of it, because the language is public record and or collection filed. That can be one of two things. It could be either, number one, the furnishing of a third party collection, meaning that John defaults on an apartment lease, apartment complex outsources the collection of that lease to some ABC collection agency, and then ABC collection agency reports that to my credit reports. That can actually absolutely trigger that particular code. And then number two, it's not uncommon for companies to buy defaulted debts, and those are referred to as debt buyers. And so debt buyers can buy defaulted debts and then furnish, and they're now your new creditor, whether you want them to be or not, because they've purchased your debt. They can furnish the collection account to the credit reporting agencies, and that will also trigger that particular credit score factor. So to just be aware that there's a whole lot of different possibilities as to why that particular code is popping up.
Okay. Manuel, that is a detailed answer right there. I hope that helps you. Jamie, let's see here. Let's bring this up. I had 4 credit cards each with 4 to 6 years perfect payment, then missed 4 payments straight, which caused one of the credit cards to report to the next. I'm not sure what you mean by that.
I think I know what she's talking about.
You do? Okay. Let me bring it back up again. Then all the cards got closed and sold. I never knew this was a thing, which also caused me to drop score major from my credit age, going from 6 years to 1 year. How would I go about correcting that?
Well, so number one, I don't know what your credit score is prior to all this stuff happening. But missing 4 payments in a row is probably the culprit as to why your credit scores went down, right? Because you miss 4 payments, that's a 30, 60, 90, 120 on your end. And they're reporting that to the credit reporting agencies.
And then it sounds like they were charged off on top of that, and then
maybe. I'm not aware of credit card issuers sharing that level of information. I am, however, familiar that the credit card issuers share that information with the credit bureaus, and most large credit card issuers do monthly account management reviews of their cardholder base. And so, the subsequent, what we'll call kind of a downriver, the downriver credit card issuers would have seen that you're now going more and more delinquent with a particular card issuer, and they're all just mitigating their risk by closing the account from underneath you. So there's a couple things that happened and a couple of things that didn't happen there. Number one, you obviously lost access to all those credit card accounts. But your credit score age did not go down when they did that, because the credit score, it's called time in file. Time in file is the credit score metric, and the time in file metric considers both open and closed accounts. And so you could have a bunch of closed accounts on your credit report, and as long as they're still on the credit report, the age of the account is still being considered in the scoring metric. So even though you definitely lost access to all that open to buy, if you had balances on your cards, your utilization may have gone up because you lost the value of the unused limits on those cards. And obviously missing payments for 4 straight months is highly likely responsible for some component of the credit score drop, but it's not because of the age. It's not because of the age component. I mean, FICO scores consider both open and closed accounts when they calculate those age-related metrics, and you can see that on their website if you don't believe me.
Yeah, and the age is a relatively small aspect of your credit score relation, in comparison to balances owed and credit history, and all of that's being affected by what happened here. As far as correcting that, there really isn't anything so much to correct, Jamie, other than you're in that situation where you got to rebuild. If you've satisfied all the debts, that's a good thing, and now it's just rebuilding. And I get it. I've been there myself. In fact, that's how I got into this 11 years ago, 12 years ago, is having to do exactly what you have to do, which is, you're not starting from scratch necessarily, but it's going to be a little bit of an uphill battle, but it's not impossible to, recover and have a good credit score in 24 months, 36 months, as long as you're doing everything right. Stan, good to see you again. Question being asked: when a disputed item gets deleted, why would the same collection company place the collection back on your credit report? Guests watching with me. Well, hello, guests of Stan.
Yeah, so one of the, I'm not sure it's a myth, maybe we'll call it a misunderstanding. One of the common misunderstandings with respect to credit reporting and the dispute process is, well, there's a lot of misunderstandings, but the one that could be at play here could be you dispute something and the item is removed from one or more of your credit reports, and then it comes back on sometime in the future. That's perfectly legal. There's nothing in any federal or state statute that suggests or indicates that once something is deleted, it can never be reported again. It absolutely can be reported again. And generally when that occurs, I'm not saying this is your scenario, Stan, but generally when that occurs is something is suppressed or blocked because someone has convinced the credit bureaus that it's fraudulent, it was caused by fraud, and the furnisher certifies, no, it was not caused by fraud. So they will actually rescind any sort of blocking of that account, and it'll just go right back on the credit report, as if nothing happened. That's number one. Number two, if a furnisher receives a dispute and they don't respond to the credit bureaus are going to delete the account because it's unverifiable. They have to remove accounts that can't be verified. And obviously, if the furnisher is not willing to respond to a dispute, it's unverifiable. The credit bureaus are going to chuck it. That doesn't mean that the furnishers can't respond a week or two later and say, "Oh no, this is accurate," and then boom, it just goes right back on the credit report, or they re-report it during their normal monthly organic update of all of their accounts. And so that's generally why you would see something reappear on a credit report.
Jamie says thank you.
You are welcome.
So Stan, as far as recommend disputing it, the same company, that's up to you. My default position is dispute it if that's what you want to do, and the best reason is always going to be the one that describes why the account shouldn't be there. That is my standard explanation, or my standard piece of advice when it comes to disputing something. You are free to do as you like. John, where are we with time? We're coming up towards the end. Okay, we're going to jump off in a second, so if you've got a quick question We've got John here for another minute or two, I think, before we're going to call it a day.
Good crowd.
Good questions.
Good
A
crowd.
bigger crowd today. We've got a couple dozen people on, looks like. So
Thanks,
if you've been
y'all.
watching, you're sitting on the fence, and you have a question that does not directly relate to how do I fix my credit, but if you have a credit question, scores, how things work, how bureaus work, please ask, and we'll get John to answer it while we still have him here for the next minute or two. If not, not forever hold your peace, but it'll probably be a couple of weeks before John is back. But of course, I am more than happy to answer the question for you.
I have a trial in 2 weeks.
Really? That's very rare. What is it? 93, 96% settle, and then
Yeah.
occasionally you get that.
I mean, it may not happen, but for those of you who are interested, I am a defense expert for a debt collector, and we're there unless something happens, unless everyone settles or the trial gets rescheduled, which is not uncommon at all. Then I'm going to be somewhere in California in the next 2 weeks.
Okay. Let's see. Let's help you keep grinding. It'll pay off. Okay, very good. Satoria, you are sending this to everybody you know. I appreciate that. Sadly, we are calling it a night. We are done for the day, but we are here apart from the example I set for the last 2 weeks when I wasn't here. But typically I'm here every Wednesday, and usually 2 Wednesdays out of the month I'm here with John. So, John, thank you so much. I actually learned a couple things today. That was really in-depth information. I really appreciate it.
Yeah,
and everybody who watched today, thank you so much. And then great comments. And then we'll see everybody next Wednesday. Thanks, John. Take care.
Y'all take care.